Hey everybody, welcome to Wild, Creative, and Confident, a video interview series where you can learn from the most inspiring industry leaders on how you can use your passion and creativity to design the life and business of your dreams. I'm your host, Sarah Marie Thompson, the creative success coach from wildandcreative.com, and today I have with me a special artistic guest. Her name is Shelley Klammer, and she's an artist, counselor, author, and website and owner of the website Expressive Art Workshops. Shelley has written numerous ebooks and articles that support the release and understanding of emotional pain through daily spontaneous creative practices. Her private practice focuses on the modalities of art and narrative psychotherapy as the means to discover, understand, integrate rejected aspects of self into conscious awareness. So, good for you. Thank you very much for joining us. It's such a you'll have so many wonderful stories, I know, to talk to us about today. So I want to dive into it. You're obviously very, very creative. I always like to ask this question, right off the hop. When did you start, when did you really start expressing your creativity, and what does it really mean to you right now?
Right. I love that question that, you go way back and consider where did it start, because I think we all start out really creative, and I, like everybody, was creative as a little one, and I actually kind of lost my creativity as I got socialized. So by the time I was 7 or 8, there was about a 20-year period where I think my creativity became very structured and outer directed, and that I was, looking to the world to tell me I was good at drawing or good at painting, because that's the way we're trained in school. We do the formulaic kind of crafts, and that kind of trained me out of my creativity. But prior to 7 and 8, I was reflecting on this. I was a very creative, mystical kind of child. I do remember, jumping rope. And I lived back in the day when children could wander the streets by themselves, at 4 and 5 years old, without parental accompaniment. And so this was a very magical time for me, where I could just ride my bike until it was dark, and my mom would call me in just at dusk, and I would ride my bike around or walk around the neighborhoods. And I remember really feeling a sense of energy. I love to look at different houses and sense into who was living there. And I found that I could read the soul of a house. Some houses that I walked by felt quite sinister. Some houses felt very creative, and some felt very light, and some felt very bland,
Yep.
And I really enjoyed experiencing energy in that way when I was little. And I was also very prolifically creative. I remember when I was about 5 years old, I started spontaneously doing these little line drawings. And I had a bit of an entrepreneurial spirit. I started to sell them door to door.
Oh.
Around our neighborhood for 10 cents each, till my mom had to stop me because I became so prolific, and I kept going up to people's doors and showing them my wares and asking them to buy my drawings. And then I hit school age, and luckily my early school years, I had a really creative teacher, and she was lovely. When I was in grade 2, she had these little baskets of prompts, writing prompts and art prompts. So she really encouraged our originality. And so we would go and, pick out little story prompts and little art prompts. And I developed quite an elaborate personal style of drawing when I was in grade 2. And it's very similar to the style that I have now, very patterned, very detailed. I used to draw lots of little clown pictures with polka dots and stripes and things. And then she told my mom, my teacher, she said, your daughter's talented in art. She should go to art camp. And I went to art camp that summer, and it was very formulaic drawing. It was, draw the cat with the circle, with the 2 eyes, with the, perfect little triangles for the ears. And I lost sort of passion for my originality. The outside started to feed into me, and I just closed down my originality for probably about 20 years. And I mean, and that didn't mean I wasn't creating. I mean, I went to design school, like you did. And I also was a gallery artist for quite a few years, and I had some success, but my paintings were very perfect. Like I spent a lot of time making them perfect, and I
Mm-hmm.
didn't enjoy my process.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I related to a lot of what you've just said, even from the start where you mentioned about, being able to be outside when you're very young and how, you know, really being able to express yourself and just spend time outside as a young child and not have to worry about the worries that come with, today's lifestyle. I definitely experienced that as well as a young child, and it makes for a much more magical and creative upbringing, I find. And I don't know if you lived in the country. I mean, I lived in the country, so I mean that definitely does make a difference. But it allows a child's mind to explore more, and to really just keep building off their creativity, right? So instead of being inside playing video games all the time, that kind of thing, right? So
Right, but yeah, we lived in big city, and it was just completely casual, and but yeah, when I had my daughter, it was like, oh my God, keep her near, and that was just the social climate of the time when she was little. But yeah, it was a very magical time that wasn't so overly parentally structured and socially structured. So yeah.
can you can you do me a favor? Just turn up your volume just a tiny little bit.
Yeah.
That's perfect. Great. So I want to ask you, how did you always know deep down? I mean, I know that you just talked about a little bit of a transformation that you had with creativity, but did you always know deep down that you would get to a point where you were really helping support other artists, being a teacher and a mentor for other artists?
Well, I think it started to peak in my 20s. I started to have these little tiny spiritual openings where I started to see myself as larger than what I was, because I just started, from 8 to about 30, I was in this very sort of socially acceptable, trying to please my parents, be a good daughter. And I was married at the time, trying to be a good wife. And I was just trying to fit in, but I kept having these little spiritual experiences. So I would go into a bookstore, and, like a spiritual book would fall on my head, and then I would read it, and it would provide like a heart opening for me. And and so I started to have all these little intuitions, and I started to follow my intuitions just to see where they would lead. And I had all these really profound experiences when I just stopped reasoning and started following my inner life. And
Mm-hmm.
one example is, I had just read my first spiritual book, and I was sitting in my art studio, and I was feeling my heart open, and I all of a sudden had this directive: get your shoes on, get your coat on, go walk down to the busy street that was near my home. And so I like, okay, but it felt very spiritually imbued. It was inner directed. And so I did. And when I got down to the busy street, I walked past a man who was in terrible pain, and he was laying in front of an ambulance, and he was screaming out. And because I just had this heart opening in my studio, I just did this big boosh
Mm-hmm.
towards him, just this big love, like, and just very spontaneously, it just came out of me. I didn't preconceive, I didn't think about it. And then I walked by, and then half a block later, my walk was over. It was just like, oh, okay, I guess I'm going back home now. And so I turned around and walked past the man again. He was calm. He was being loaded into the ambulance, and there was this sort of peace all around, and it was quiet. And I'm not sort of sharing this to, say, oh, I'm a great healer. But when we start to follow our intuition, we get inklings on how we can contribute to life and how we can add to the flow of life, and life gets very magical. Versus,
Totally.
yeah, like versus when we're in our emotional pain and we're just in our stuff and we can't see or hear,
Mm-hmm.
the higher directives.
And most of the time, I think a lot of people probably get intuitive nudges to, go on a walk or to do whatever, to take a class. But, it's just that kind of overbearing ego or mind or the day-to-day life that gets in the way of saying, oh, no, I won't bother, or something like that, right? But when we really do trust our intuitive nudges or, our intuitive path that's laid out in front of us, magical stuff can happen, right? And you can really find out a lot about yourself.
Yeah, very good point. And I think most people ignore them. And so you don't follow the one flow to the next flow to the next flow to the next flow, and you just ignore it, and you're not in your flow, so you don't get to have that experience.
I want to ask you about, I feel like you'll have a good answer for this. I want to ask you about receiving and how you have been able to receive all that you have wanted in your life. Has there been a process for you? Are you there yet? Like what can you give us on that?
Yeah. Well, I've had a hard time receiving, actually. This has been a very prosperous year for me, but I've also struggled a lot. So this has been like a wonderful year, but I think it is the fruit of having done a lot of emotional work and clearing blocks in my emotional field, because I think that when we're struggling emotionally, it's very hard to see possibilities, and it's very hard to contribute to the flow of life, right? So, when we're in heavy emotions like sadness, anger, guilt, fear, all these things, it's not that they're bad. They do need to be processed. They do need to be looked at. But for me, I've been in a long process of looking at all of the sort of limiting beliefs that I inherited, feeling the pain, releasing the pain, drawing it out, writing it out, supporting other people to do the same, and just like really digging deep to see what the root of that limiting belief is that drives that emotional pain. And so now at this point in my life, I feel quite emotionally clear most of the time. And so, I'm more able to follow every little instinct and intuition. And I'm also able to stop and rest and not work so hard, because I'm just open, and when I can stay in that higher flow, especially now that I'm not working under a structured income, I actually see a direct correlation between, money I make in a day versus how I'm flowing or not flowing,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let's just for a minute, let's talk about some of those limiting beliefs that you have or you had and so many other women could be experiencing right now, because, when you get into the topic of receiving and really start diving deep into, what limiting beliefs that you could have, and you really don't think at the time that you might even have these, and you just, say there's a general list of them, you're just like, oh my gosh, I think I have a majority of them, right? So what were some of the ones that you really had to get over?
Oh my goodness. Well, I worked for years on my self-esteem. That was a big one. Like I was sort of raised with ideas that, women couldn't make a lot of money, and,
Yep.
that I just I went through a long period of my working life where like, oh my God, I'm never going to make it, and just sludging along. Like, when I left my marriage when I was 30, I got together with my partner, and we started living this really creative life. Right now, where we are now, living in the mountains, and we were, we had a little homestead, and we were making goat cheese and grinding our own grain and painting every day. And I was having a really hard time even wanting to work. I was struggling with self-esteem around even wanting to have a job. I just wanted to paint all day and process myself. And but I had to get out there, and because there wasn't a lot of jobs in the area, I had to, take jobs I didn't like, cooking in a cafe and that kind of thing. And I just really sludged through a lot of beliefs like, oh, I'm never going to make it. That was a biggie, that women don't make a lot of money. And I've gotten through that now. Like I've proven that wrong. But the big thing that I'm working with now is guilt. And I think that anybody who wants to work with abundance, it's really, really, really super helpful to go inside your body. How I test it is I'll say to myself, I'm a really good person. And then if I have any sort of, like tweak,
Yep.
no, you're not. There's some kind of guilty, something to clear. And so I have cleared I have really, really cleared a lot of my limiting beliefs. But right now, I'd say it's just like getting through all the vestiges of guilt, you know, in terms of, you know, like if you can't sit in the sweetness of I'm a good person and just feel that goodness all throughout your body, all throughout your heart, all through your soul and mind, those are the areas where you need to go into looking at where you feel guilty for not giving to life. And I should say that, you know, we all have layers and layers and layers and layers and layers and layers of guilt, because when we're struggling with our very emotional human pain, we're not in the flow of giving, and we don't give to others. We pull in, and this affects our relationships. You know, like I went through a long period where I was intensely journaling out my own darkness, you know, in my 30s. And I really feel there was some guilt that I had to clear there, because I wasn't very present for my partner, and I wasn't very present for my daughter, because I was so in my own process. So there's processes to just go back and just look at where you didn't flow and where you didn't give, and how that affected other people, you know. And
I like
yeah.
Sorry, I was going to say, I like what you said about, you know, feeling it in your body, because, you know, I mean, it doesn't have to just be a limiting belief that you have, but, you know, if anything's really bothering you or making you upset, one can usually feel it somewhere in their body, right? And if you actually pay attention to that, so say whatever in your shoulder is bothering you, right? You can really breathe into that. And, you know, I love to actually give it a color and say, oh, it's like a horrible mustard, like, so you know what I mean, like, and then I think about that color. Okay, I don't like that color. Okay, like, let's just allow it, and you know, and then it usually dissipates. So that's a really great point on how you can really pinpoint different things that are bothering you in your body and allow and release, right? So
Yes, exactly. Because if you're holding tightness or pain in your body, that's an area where you're not receiving. Because I know that when I'm fully receiving, my body is open, my heart is open, my mind is at ease. I'm not saying that it always is. And I know when it's not, I'm repelling goodness coming to me. So going to those places in the body and just loving them and giving them a color and watching them transform, that's a real beautiful thing to do. And also just to see, is there guilt there? Is there shame there? Is there anger, sadness? Is there a limiting belief? Am I criticizing myself too much? You know? Yeah.
So tell me, what is infinite receiving to you? What does that mean to you?
Well, that is a big...
You can't wrap it up all in one sentence?
Infinite receiving is, you know, that's like, you know, most of us live on a horizontal plane. We have a practical life that we need to tend to. We have families, children, spouses, partners. We have to go to a job every day. We have to function as highly as we can in that job. That's kind of the horizontal plane. And when we look out on the horizontal plane of the practical human world, it's not infinite. There's lots of limits. You know, I worked in healthcare for 10 years, and it was very structured. You know, you couldn't be 3 minutes late. You had to read policy manuals that were, you know, 5 feet thick. You know, it was very rule oriented, very structured. And as an artist, you know, who had this higher vision of infinite receiving. Here I am in the human world, because we are spiritual and we are human, and I had to learn how to reconcile the two, you know. So I had this vision of myself, actually before we moved to the big city, because we were having trouble finding work. I was tired of working in cafes for 12-hour shifts a day. I went on this beautiful mountain walk, and I prayed and I asked, I said, how can we come back here? And this was 12 years ago, and I got the message, write e-courses. And at the time, I didn't know what an e-course was, and computers were like just coming into being. We had like, I don't know, I think we paid like $3,000 or $4,000 for our little laptop, you know, like they were quite rare. And I didn't know what an e-course was, but then we moved to the big city. I got a job full-time in healthcare as an artist in healthcare, but still in a very structured government kind of job. And I had to reconcile this infinite vision with this horizontal reality of needing to provide for my family and pay the rent and the food and all of that. So how did I reconcile that? There were periods where I would just be despairing, like I don't see how this infinite vision can translate into this material realm. It's very hard for us to see it in the world. We have it inside. We've had this vision, but I just kind of stuck to it and kept trying to actualize this vision. And it took about 12 years. And here we are. And I've written 12 e-courses on my nights and weekends from my full-time job. And now I have a full-time living from writing e-courses. But during that time, I struggled with infinite receiving. It just felt nowhere near sometimes, and I would just lament, like, how do I live this vision? But it took time for
you needed to be ready for it too.
Yeah, it took time for my character to develop in order to hold the vision. So, oftentimes I would just ask, why am I still here? And I would get answers like, well, you haven't learned how to be present enough yet. You don't have enough integrity yet. All these kinds of things. And so I'd have to get to work on time and, practice little pieces of my integrity and deepen my relationships at work and listen deeper and all of those things. So there was a lot of development. So I always say to people, wherever you are is where you need to be, because hang on to that higher vision, that infinite vision of abundance, but also there's a lot of up-leveling that needs to happen, a lot of emotional work, a lot of
acceptance,
refining. Yes, and acceptance too. It takes time to live into our higher visions, for sure, because they're high, they're higher than where we are when we get them. Mm-hmm. So that's sort of a roundabout answer, yeah.
No, that's a good point. I think it was in another interview, I was talking to Maru about the same thing, and she was explaining how we can be wanting to have XYZ, but if someone asks you what your capacity to receive XYZ is, you'll probably be like, ooh, like 5%. You know what I mean? So we can want and want and want, but we really need to be able to get to that place too, to be able to dock the boat too, right? So yeah,
it's a process. It's like I thought it would be instant. Like I went into healthcare and I thought, I'll be here a year and then I'll be making money, on my e-courses. But it took a long time for me to actually become the person that I saw myself. It took a good 12 years before I became that vision.
So you've explained to us so many different things that have happened in your life and all the different careers that you've had, and so I would imagine it to be quite a colorful quilt of experiences that you've had. So tell me though, in this quilt of experiences, what has been your biggest achievement out of everything?
That's such a good question, because strangely enough, it was actually lasting for 10 years in my full-time job in healthcare, only because I was actually, afraid to work prior to that. And I became very strong, and I was able to find my higher self within limited circumstances.
Nice.
Yeah, so I think that was my greatest achievement, because now, it's fine. I can go on a 2-hour walk. I have time now if I want to. I can go up to the mountains. I have time to create. I had no time when I was in healthcare, and it was a real struggle for me to call upon my higher capacities. And so I felt that becoming the best self I could be within very limited circumstances, as they felt to me, in terms of, it was really hard for me to go to a job Monday to Friday. And even though I worked in a beautiful art studio and a very highly funded studio, it was really hard for me to just be within those those four walls every day for 10 years and not have the freedom, having my time so structured, that was just extremely challenged. I wanted to be spontaneous and creative and, write all the time, and I couldn't. I had to really schedule my life.
It's hard to be really creative within parameters of creativity, right? It's kind of actually like an oxymoron, really. That career that you had obviously was challenging, but rewarding in a sense now that you can look back, right? And that's what you're explaining to us. That's amazing. My mom actually was in healthcare. No, she was nursing, but all growing up through my childhood. And I always kind of looked at healthcare like, it's something that everybody needs. It's something that's wanted. And it's so amazing the people that are able to stick it out in healthcare too, because, I'm sure in a sense they love being there and love helping others, but it seems like a very, what's the right word? Dense. Seems like a very dense and incredibly structured career that doesn't really allow you to have that breathing room to be creative, right? So
yeah, it's true. It is very incredibly structured, incredibly rule oriented, and but there's neat windows in healthcare in terms of I was working with people at the end of life, so there was that whole transparency of people leaving this world, and it was a really big center that I worked in as well, so 300 people. So I met hundreds of people over the years, and I got to hear lots of different life stories, and so yeah, it was very enriching within the very incredible structure. Yeah, lots of trainings, lots of, manuals to read, that kind of thing.
Well, I have to say I commend you now that you just brought up that piece about being in end of life care with your career, because I actually after my grandma passed away a few years back, I decided that I wanted to be a volunteer at the hospice house doing art therapy and just volunteering, and I only lasted 6 months until they asked me to go home because I was too emotional. So unfortunately, in situations like that in your own town, you can, see people come and go through the hospice area that So that's definitely hard as well, too. But yeah, no good for you. You weren't asked to leave.
Yeah, well, I found my first year doing it extremely hard. I cried a lot too, and to the point where, we were, you know, we were asking for spiritual care, the new ones on the team, just because you get so deeply attached. You work in this very deep creative capacity with someone, and people share a lot at the end of their life, as you probably know, and so there's this very, very deep connection. But I also think that it helps us grieve our old losses as well, and it may have helped you grieve your grandmother's loss as well. There's a therapy in that, and then after about a year of that, the terribleness or the sadness of it, the sort of the grief kind of left my body, and I was able to see it as more of this, almost like a magical kind of a transparent time, where, because I had so many people tell me, again, peeking into that spiritual world or that infinite reality, people at the end of life, they'll often talk about going home, and they'll start to see relatives that have passed on their mother and talk about them. And so there was, again, that longing for the spiritual to kind of lean into my practical life that I experienced as a child, that I got to experience there as well. So it was really neat.
And did that, okay, so let me phrase this well. Did you working in end of life care have much to do with the way that your art is now? Like, you know what I mean? Like, did that experience, because it's a different experience. Not everybody experiences that, right? Does that have a lot to do? Can you see that in your art now? Did it change you in some way?
Oh, yeah. Well, for one thing, it made me realize, I think that when we're younger, I started when I was 40. And at that point, I hadn't really even thought. I'd had tons of death in my family, tons of grief. But for some reason, you don't really think, oh, I'm going to die, And when you start to consider, oh, my life is limited, in its time frame. So what do I want to do in this time? It actually made me intensify my purpose a lot more, because I really, um, I wrote a little newsletter when I was there, and it was a story newsletter. And so people would tell me the whole story of their life, and I would write articles about their life. And I started to see that the people that made really high and sort of inspired choices ended up with a better, happier life at the end as they were leaving.
Mm.
People who made very limited choices, who were very worried all the time or scared all the time, they had a much harder death. They had a much harder end of life period. And so that really made me look at my own negative attitudes towards life, my own limitations, and kind of really open up the frame so that I could see the end. I could see that if I keep going with this belief, I'm going to end up with this physical ailment. I'm going to end up with this mental block, with this pain, this emotional pain. So that was a really neat experience for me.
And people can see that just on people every day, right? I mean, when you meet somebody, you don't have to necessarily meet them to understand what their vibe is or their energy, right? You can kind of tell individuals when you meet them if they are creatively expressed or inspiredly expressed, can't you? So
Yeah, you can just see, you go into a cafe, like we went for coffee this morning at a cafe, and you can see people who are holding in a lot of emotions. There's just an energy of withheld, of heaviness. And you can see the people who feel lighter in their energy field. And, I myself have been extremely heavy in my life, so I recognize it in others. And you can even see sometimes where people are holding it. And so, yeah, there's some inner work to do to letting that go so that you can get back into the flow, or the infinite abundance, as you call it.
what would you say to the entrepreneurs that are watching, or future entrepreneurs, or just any individual that's watching? What would you say that might be a tool or method or something like that that could help them really shift into finding their true authentic calling?
Well, kind of as we've talked about through this conversation, it's so important to act upon every little intuition that you get, because most people get intuitions and they think that doesn't make any sense. I'm not going to do that. But I've heard really profound stories of one of my friends who's a writer. I mean, this is kind of a tragedy, but in a sense, some people like will get senses of how we need to express ourselves. In her writing, she was sharing with me that somebody that she had met at her workplace had the insight that she needed to start weaving in order to sort of heal her soul. And she was just busy, work a day, going to her 9 to 5, taking care of the kids, and she just didn't pursue it. But a year later, she found out that she had cancer. And I don't know how people would correlate that, but I do think we get hints. I do think we get little hints on how to heal ourselves, and they might not make sense with our practical life even.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, for instance, when I was told by my higher mind or my intuition write e-courses, I did not even consider myself a writer. Like I thought that was a crazy idea. I was a painter at the time, and I just decided that I would just start writing my ideas down in little notebooks. And so I would carry these notebooks all through when I was working full time. And literally, like at the stoplight on the commute to work, I would be writing ideas down. And, at the end of the day, and I, try to fit them in and around and on the bus or whatever I was. And when I got home, I would just transcribe them all into my business, all into my e-courses, and, all into my writing on my website. So that built this very, very organic business that I actually didn't spend a lot of time visualizing and, oh, this is what it's going to be. I just followed every little inkling, even though it didn't make sense. Like my most popular e-course right now, I'll just give you an example. It was never intended to be an e-course. All I knew was I'm working in healthcare. I get this idea. You're going to do 100 art journaling prompts. And I thought, oh my God, 100? Really? That's And so, but every day I got a new idea on a piece of art to do, on the writing directive that would go with it. And it perfectly synced with my own emotional healing. And it also synced with the people I was working with in therapy in my private practice at home, because at that point I was doing a private practice as well in the evenings and on the weekends. And so I had workshopped this for years, and I had put it out for free, and I was giving it to my clients. And then I was just, at the very, very end of my time in healthcare, I got the directive, turn it into an e-course. And so I did the massive amount of work of translating it to email. And it's earning me my full-time living. And I never intended it to be a course. I just intended it to be a healing sort of process for myself and my clients. So,
and what is that e-course about, the one that you just mentioned?
It's called 100 Days of Art Journal Therapy. And so you get 100 prompts, all their expressive art and writing. And so it's just really doing very, very deep emotional work through spontaneous writing and expressive art. And it's kind of a melding of my two interests, which are art and psychology and spirituality. So I guess, just a real deep look at, we are both human, and divine, horizontal, vertical, and how to reconcile the two into a state of feeling healed and whole.
Nice. Very, very, sounds very interesting. So tell us about like all of your e-courses. You said you have a lot. Do you still have a lot out there right now?
Yeah, I do. I've written about, I guess, 12 or 14. I've written 2 on art facilitation because I became an expert at art facilitation when I was in healthcare. And I was doing night classes in my community, and I was teaching collage classes at art supply stores, and I was all over. Like, I did a lot of work with people in the last 10 years. And but most of my courses are for emotional healing, and I think I've written about 4 or 5 expressive writing courses, and also probably an equal amount of expressive art courses, and they're all informed from within my own pain process, my very, my deep desire to heal myself, and then starting to work with people in my therapy practice online and seeing that we all have these very similar patterns of emotional pain, and starting to see the origins and where that came from. So so I've got lots of collage is actually one of my specialties, spontaneous collage, but I have lots of just pretty much everything in terms of art.
Now, I know that you actually have a little free gift for our viewers, and it is 30 days to narrative therapy. So can you explain that a little bit to us?
Yeah, this one, some of my courses, they just come so fast. Like this one, I can feel them sort of like on the side of my brain, like I'm going to write this course on, story writing. And I felt it there. I was just sitting there for years. And one day it was like, okay, it's time. And it just like came through. And that's because I've practiced writing a lot at this point. But what you get is just a basic, it's a very short little story prompt that every day you would just write a little story about your birth, about your parents, and then the prompts get more creative from there. And you start to see over 30 days how you're telling the story of your life, right? So, and this is good, like what we've talked about is most people are really surprised, like, oh my goodness, I see my life really negatively, or I'm more inspired than I thought, or I don't have memories of my childhood. That's so strange. And so it just opens your eyes to how you're telling the story of your life. And in narrative therapy, the concept is that you can keep retelling your story in more positive ways. So I always encourage people, if you want to take it again, let me know. I'll reset you to 0, and then just rewrite it another time and rewrite it another time. And people are starting to rewrite their story, and it's easier to make it more positive as you go along, because once you see the negative parts, then it becomes conscious. You can heal it, let it go, and then write it again in a different way. And really that's a big part of my own healing. It's just rewriting my story. And it's of course much, much easier to rewrite your story when you've released a lot of emotional pain, because our emotional pain also drives those dark, heavy stories, right?
Awesome. I love that idea. I'm definitely going to check that out and see what I come up with. Where can everybody find you online? Like, where can people take your e-courses? Where can they find all about you?
I am at expressiveartworkshops.com, and all of my courses are there. They're all actually listed on the very first page, so you can look at them at a glance, and then I have much deeper descriptions embedded in the course,
Okay.
or in the website rather. And that's pretty much it. I mean, I have lots of different articles on different portals, but they're all linked straight from my website, and I have a blog, but basically my website is the portal to everything else. So yeah.
Awesome. That's wonderful. I have got a last question for you before we end. You might know what it is if you watched the last series, but what makes you wild, creative, and confident?
Oh, I forgot you were going to ask me that question.
Mm-hmm.
I think what makes me wild, creative, and confident is in my heart, my love. When my heart is open, I've struggled a lot with. I've always known I've have a big heart, but I've also had a lot of pain in my heart. And so as the pain is cleared over the years, I know that when my heart is open, I laugh big and I love big, and I'm known for my big laugh and having fun. And so the lightness of my heart, which has been hard won, mm-hmm. is what makes me wild, creative, and confident.
That's a good answer. I thank you so much for being on this series with us. And we have tapped into a niche of people that are going to be watching this that are going to resonate with your story and just, really understand that, yeah, I've got some emotional baggage that I need to deal with. So, everybody, Shelley is the lady. You want to check out her website, check out her courses. I mean, what you just described to us sounds amazing and I'm sure to so many people. So, it's really about releasing all that pain and releasing pain and discomfort within yourself through creativity. So, I mean, I think that's what we're all about. So thank you so much again. And everybody, thanks for watching. And be sure to also check out the wildandcreative.com, the 6 Steps to Creative Success, a new program that we have just launched on there. And we will see you all again soon. Thank you.